Okay, MOvember 2020, and this is day 13. I'm going to read an excerpt for tonight's video on tools for recovery for mental health from the Tao of Fully Feeling, Harvesting Forgiveness Out of Blame, which is a book by Pete Walker. There is so many places I can dive into this book for tonight. What I've chosen is Pete's chapter 6 of the book, and he's talking about grieving promotes vitality by decreasing self-destructiveness. And he goes through, I'm going to read the introduction and one of the four little sections that he writes about. And so tonight we'll be focusing on dissociation, but I will read just the little introduction to this chapter, and then each night I'll do one of the extra subjects, tonight being dissociation. So neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate pain, Carl Jung, and one cannot flee from oneself. No flight avails against danger from within. Hence, the ego's defense mechanisms are condemned to falsify the inner perception. Not infrequently, it turns out that the ego has paid too high a price for the services which these mechanisms render. And that's Sigmund Freud. There are four key ways that children protect themselves from being overwhelmed by the emotional pain of prolonged abuse and neglect. They are defensive strategies and postures of dissociation, hypervigilance, obsessiveness, and compulsiveness. Children in dysfunctional families instinctively become hypervigilant, disassociated, obsessive, and/or compulsive to block out the unbearable harshness of family existence, to numb their felt sense of fear and shame, and to dull their aching hunger for love and appreciation. Children cannot experience the raw, ongoing pain of parental rejection and still maintain the desire to live. In the dysfunctional family, existing in a constantly defended state is the lesser of two evils. If we are forced to rely on defense mechanisms throughout our childhood, they rigidify our permanent states of being and strategies of living. These defenses and their destructive side effects injure us throughout our lives when we do not relinquish them. Living in an overdefended state is a painful relic of the past that causes us a great loss of vitality and an enormous accumulation of new, unnecessary pain. While our defenses were like lifelines in childhood, they now have the opportunity as adults to stop harming ourselves by over-relying on them, or we now have the opportunity. Our habituation to our defenses causes us to accept them as normal ways of being and leaves us oblivious to their harmful effects. This chapter identifies the characteristics of excessive dissociation, hypervigilance, obsessiveness, and compulsiveness to help us recognize and relinquish unnecessary defendedness. The goal of recovery, however, is not the complete elimination of our defenses. There will always be occasions when our defensive postures healthily serve us, and as we will subsequently see. Recovery aims rather at giving us the choice to be in an undefended state in safe situations, so that we are not insulated from the emotional love that can now be had in real intimacy. Progress in recovery, then, is gradually reflected in spending less time disassociated, hypervigilant, obsessive, and/or compulsive, and more time relaxed and spontaneously engaging in life. So, dissociation. When a person continually faces danger, he is powerless to overcome it. His final line of defense is at last to avoid even feeling the danger, which is by Rollo May. Dissociation is the psychic defense mechanism by which we instinctively blunt our awareness to harsh or undesirable realities. Dissociation defends us from the being over-impacted by internal or external circumstances that are too painful or unpleasant to apprehend. When we are disassociated, we unconsciously remove part or all of our awareness from the immediate reality. Dissociation, like the other defenses, is not an all or none phenomenon. Most of us vary in our degree and frequency of being disassociated. Mild dissociation manifests in an innocuous absent-mindedness. Most of us periodically disassociate while listening and suddenly realize we haven't registered what was just said. My first psychology teacher described this as our tendency to wander off on 30-second mental trips. Daydreaming is another name for disassociating mental trips, and daydreaming is actually a healthy psychic mechanism when it is not excessive or does not interfere with normal life functioning. In moderation, daydreaming is a delightful form of entertainment, an important part of creativity, and a direct channel into our deepest levels of intuition. As W.H. Auden wrote, human beings are by nature actors who cannot become something until they first have pretended to be it. Sleep is also a healthy form of disassociation unless it is excessive. Those who cannot stay awake when they are physically well rested sometimes become groggy as they disassociate to avoid something they don't want to face. Some of us become instantly drowsy whenever our feelings are stirred up and threaten to emerge into consciousness. Disassociation is also commonly experienced as dullness, fogginess, or being in a daze. A motorist who drives past his usual freeway exit is often disassociating. So is the reader who suddenly realizes she has no idea what was in the last paragraph she read. Many accidents are caused by this level of disassociation. They occur when we are not present enough to notice the branch we are about to walk into or the car that has suddenly stopped in front of us. A deeper form of disassociation occurs when we appear spaced out, as if we are off in another world, or as if the lights are on and nobody's home. Disassociation is especially problematic when it includes unpleasant sensations of confusion, unreality, and disorientation. When the onset of such intense dissociation symptoms or dissociative symptoms is sudden and abrupt, we may feel faint and dizzy, as if we are spinning out of control and losing our normal sense of reality. The most intense forms of disassociation are shock, coma, and amnesia. When a trauma is too overwhelming to endure, awareness is automatically and completely withdrawn from consciousness. The prestigious amount of physical pain caused by a serious car accident often sends the victim into shock. If his injuries are massive, he may become comatose. Amnesia is also a dissociative response to trauma. Most children become at least partially amnesic when they suffer severe ongoing abuse. In overly traumatic times, they disassociate so far away from their immediate reality that they don't perceive what is directly before them. Perhaps you have seen pictures of broken, hollow-eyed children who seem no longer to be behind their eyes. Maybe the mechanism in our brain that registers and records what we see doesn't operate during our greatest traumas. I can vividly remember how my poor scapegoated sister would get a vacant, faraway look in her eyes whenever my rageaholic father helped her with her homework. Traumatized by his punishing methods, her attention dissolved so thoroughly she couldn't possibly attend to his instruction. At 10, this girl, who later recovered enough to pursue her doctorate, could not correctly answer how much is 5 plus 6, or any other question hurled at her by her father. My sister's inability to answer my fuming father's simple questions was in no way a matter of intelligence. It was purely a disassociative response to the terror that made it impossible for her to register or make sense of his questions. The fact that she still does not remember his bruising interrogations is further testimony to just how disassociated she was. I believe this kind of disassociation is the most relevant issue for many school children diagnosed with learning disabilities, as well as many adults labelled with the latest catch-all diagnosis, adult attention deficit disorder. I think research would show that many of these individuals suffer from abominable parenting and are so overwhelmed by pain and fear that they cannot stay present in normal consciousness long enough to learn efficiently. Moreover, I know many survivors whose recovery work has allowed them to reclaim their native intelligence, transcend their miserable school histories, and finally achieve scholastic and professional success. Disassociation protects us in childhood from absorbing the full toxicity of the destructive parental messages. Letting our parents' diatribes go in one ear and out the other is a healthy response to an unhealthy situation. Disassociation also allows children to stay physically present around trauma without fully experiencing it. Some children anesthetize themselves so thoroughly with disassociation they feel little or no pain during beatings. This is another reason why we customarily minimize our parents' violence. Many of us glibly dismiss the fact that we were repeatedly whipped on our bare buttocks with a belt, a switch, or a huge taunt adult hand. I bet we would howl in agony and tremble in fear now when we are not so disassociated if we were flogged in the same way by someone of proportionate size and strength. Here is a final observation on the mechanics of disassociation. I believe disassociation takes place when attention shifts from the liberal reality-orientated left brain and dissolves into the more imaginative, transcendence-orientated right brain. The right brain is reputed to control cognitive processes that involve less self-conscious attention. These range from active imagination to spontaneous daydreaming, to the deep unself-conscious states of meditation, to the temporary extinction of self-awareness in sleep. Disassociation then seems to be our reflex to retreat into a deeply oblivious part of the right brain whenever we are helpless in the face of a harsh reality. Everything in moderation, including defendedness. If we are seriously hurt by our parents, we may be adult children who still over-rely on disassociation, while effective grieving can automatically decrease unnecessary disassociation. Ridding ourselves of this defense is not an all or none issue. As noted above, a modicum of disassociation is normal and healthy, particularly as it occurs in sleep, daydreaming, and some meditative states. Disassociation is a natural, invaluable response to a sudden intense hurt. In the face of severe trauma, we are fortunate if we can retreat into some degree of shock. I wish I could learn to disassociate in a dentist chair during particularly brutal dental procedures in the past. I relied on nitrous oxide to help me disassociate. Unfortunately, many people become dependent on drugs in their efforts to avoid pain. Alcohol, marijuana, tranquilizers, and opiates are widely used to disassociate from pain. Dissociative shock is also a natural, helpful response to the death or loss of someone we deeply love. When we lose someone we cherish, our pain is so monumental we would be completely devastated if we did not disassociate. People who cannot disassociate at such moments are so flooded with pain they become incapacitated and sometimes deteriorate into madness or suicide. This is why it is normal to only feel numb when we first hear about the death of a loved one or when our partners, without warning, say they are leaving us. It takes some time to digest the overwhelming hurt of such devastating losses. They beget so much grief that effective mourning requires many discrete sessions of feeling and emoting our pain. Temporary disassociation is a healthy release from overlong immersions in grief in the early stages of mourning, when the relief brought by grieving is sometimes hard to find. The accumulated grief from our childhood losses is for many the greatest grief of all, far greater than that of any particular tragic loss in the present. This grief amassed daily for many years during the constant wounding and hacking away at our real selves. During my first dark night of the soul, I frequently felt like I had been born in a rainforest and was clear-cut the size of trees on an urban block. I'm going to read that again. During my first dark night of the soul, I frequently felt like I had been born a rainforest and was clear-cut to the size of the trees on an urban block. At that time, it was sometimes a blessed relief to use television to zone out and disassociate for a few hours. Without the ability to mobilize defense mechanisms like disassociation, survivors cannot embrace a long-term grieving process. Some severely traumatized individuals are unable to re-invoke defensive strategies once they uncover their reservoirs of childhood pain. Without the buoy of disassociation, these adult children cannot gradually process their grief without drowning in it. Tragically, many chronic schizophrenics, extreme compulsives, and severe borderline personality disorders must rely on a lifetime medication or permanent entrenchment in rigid defendedness. This is a key reason why no one should ever be coerced or shamed into doing recovery work. Although almost everyone in recovery sometimes feels as if they are drowning in their pain, it is highly unlikely that anyone who has read this far is among the small percentage of people who cannot open to their grief. Those who cannot manage grieving usually sense it on some deep level, and they shun books that encourage childhood exploration. Most recoveries must weather occasional experiences of feeling overwhelming grief to achieve significant recovery. Feeling overwhelmed was a major part of early childhood wounding. We need to re-experience our intense feelings of abandonment to find our own sorely needed compassion for those tragic years of our lives. For as Carl Jung said, it is only in a state of complete abandonment and loneliness that we experience the helpful powers of our own nature. As recovery progresses, there is less need to retreat from grieving into disassociation or other defensive postures and strategies, because mourning more consistently brings relief. Over time, habitual disassociation and defendedness spontaneously decrease, and we become more fully present to both internal and external reality. This saves us from the fate of emulating the comedian who said that he was so habitually disassociated that his life flashed before his eyes during a near-death experience, and he was shocked to see he wasn't in it. Tao of Fully Feeling, Pete Walker. I know that if you relate to a reading like that and you're not getting the support you need, please reach out for counselling or support if you're dealing with and grieving early childhood abuse and trauma. And if you disassociate to the level Pete's talking about, you can find Pete on his website, pete-walker.com, me on mine, Steve Stokes Counselling and Consulting, and go to see your GP and start that process of recovery. So be gentle with your heart. MOvember 2020, day 13. And I look forward to making another video. I'll go through the other three of those, hypervigilance, obsessiveness, and compulsiveness that Pete's got written down over the course of this MOvember. Bye.